welcome, Congresswoman. We're so thrilled to have you with us.
Thank you.
You're in the middle of a busy re-election campaign season, so thank you for making the time. I want to start on the single mom piece, which Maria mentioned, because there are so few of you in Congress. Why is that, and why does that? Yes, okay, one.
There were two, but the other one got engaged.
Okay.
To a rich guy. Wasn't that bad looking, really, when I checked, so.
Why is this a problem, and how can it change?
Yeah, so I mean, Congress responds to the problems that they see, and they can't see and do anything about things that they don't know about. So this gives way to what I call in Congress the did you know. So you're standing on the House floor, there's a lot of pushing and shoving. It's kind of like a bad cocktail party vibe, where everyone's trying to get to the bar, except the bar is just the ability to vote, right? And people will come up and they say, did you know that childcare costs more than college? Yes, yes. Did you know that bacon is $8 a pound? Yes, right? But these people have just discovered these problems that I encounter like every minute of every day, just because of who I am and the life that I lead. And so, you know, the gap, the more we can close the gap between Congress knowing what's going on and what's really going on, the more we can close that really helps us spring into action faster. And this was a huge problem during the pandemic. I remember saying to my staff, you know, a month, maybe 2 weeks even after the California closed down, after schools were closed, this is going to be a huge problem. We need to do something about this. This is going to cause parents to leave the workforce, especially women, especially parents of younger children. And we produced a staff report a month later describing this phenomenon, and it took like a year for people to be like, wow, you know, it's hard out there as a mom. And I was like, right? So I do think that representation matters. I think we have a lot of diversity in our Congress. It has improved a lot, but when it comes to, there are still pockets where we don't have the diversity. We don't have the generational diversity that we need. We need more younger voices, more early career voices, and we need that in the Democratic Party, by the way, more so even than the Republican Party, actually. I think when I got to Congress, I thought Republicans were the party of the old, rich, white man, and it turns out to be only the white man part is correct. Democrats actually have a big problem with economic diversity and with age diversity and generational diversity, just as much as Republicans. So I think you can't solve what you can't see, and our lives and that kind of lived experience is incredibly important to how we identify problems and how we think about what will actually work to solve them.
So I've heard you say sometimes that if Congress had a motto, it would be solving yesterday's problems tomorrow, maybe.
That's the vibe. That's the vibe.
What's it like to be part of an institution that you're so skeptical of?
Yeah. I mean, I think that part of my duty as a member of Congress is to look at the institution. And to step back from the policymaking of the moment or the controversy of the moment or even the people in the moment and kind of say, what's happening in this institution? What's working and what's not working? And I'll give you a good example of this. We have no committee that is squarely dedicated to technology. That's scattered among about 3 or 4 different committees, even as it has been the dominant force reshaping our society and our economy now for like 40 years, right? So our committee structure reflects sort of the 1900s, right? And so that kind of rethinking of the institution. We didn't make any use of remote work capacity until the pandemic. There is still a vibrant informal flip phone caucus in Congress.
I've not heard of the flip phone caucus, okay.
Let me tell you, there's we get on these Zooms and I can guarantee you, I just count the seconds, like 3, 2, 1. Can you hear me now? Yes, because you're unmuted. We can hear you now. So, and I think one of the things that frustrates me is not that people don't have the familiarity. Lots of us in America, for lots of different reasons, including opportunity and education, may not have technology skills. It's the lack of a growth mindset. It's that the way it's always been isn't necessarily the way it should always be. And I think that doesn't mean that I think that means that I'm pro the institution. Like, I believe in it, and so I feel like I have a duty to try to make it better and to fix it. And that's the kind of leadership that I want at businesses that I invest in, that I want at nonprofits that I donate to. Why wouldn't I want that kind of mindset in my government too?
Yeah, thank you. So, being a single mom, I know, has also lent a real urgency to your time in Congress. You have not been willing to wait around, the 15 years or whatever to gain power within your party. How's that gone over?
It's going. I mean, look, I think we have to rethink how we create opportunity in Congress. And I think that the seniority system that the Democrats employ, Republicans don't employ that system. They have a different system. They have term limits, so you do 3 terms, 6 years, and a leadership position, and then you rotate out. And they have much more of a culture of kind of contested elections. We have a much more deferential culture to our senior leaders. And I value our senior leaders a great deal. I could go on and on, I won't, about some of them and how much they've meant to me. We need to find ways to create diverse leadership, and that means multi-generational leadership. So how can we create roles and spaces for those senior leaders to still teach us, to still guide us, because they have wisdom and they have knowledge and they have experience that we need to learn from, but we also need to give rise to new voices. And we can't treat people who want to add their voice to the leadership of our country as a problem. We have to say, this is wonderful that you too are speaking up, that you too want to lead. We should be creating and cultivating that culture of leadership. And the other thing about Congress is we should have a lot more professional development, because we have like none.
Yeah.
I mean, what I learned at congressional orientation could fit on a 3x5 card and had an awful lot to do with the fact that you're not allowed to wear your raincoat onto the floor of Congress, because there's a very stern lady who will chase you down. Very little about how actually to do the job. Very little sharing of best practices, very little opportunity to think about technology and innovate. So I think we need to innovate. And here's something I often say to my constituents. I say, it's been tough being in Congress, because I was a law professor. It was considered a good job. People thought I was learned and right? And now I have the same popularity as the American cockroach. I'm not kidding. They've done polls. Congress people and cockroaches have the same level of approval. That's a real poll. And when you say that in Washington, you often hear back, well, of course, what do you expect? People don't like Republicans. No, they don't like any of us. And we have to start with that. We can't look away from that. We can't pretend that isn't there. We have to look squarely at that and say, why? Why do people not trust us? Why do they not approve of us? Because only when we look at that honestly can we start to fix it.
Right, right. I want to make sure we allow a lot of time for questions, but before I do, I'm going to ask one more. And midterms are coming up. There's been a lot of discussion about how the overturning of Roe will galvanize women to come out and vote. Do you think that's going to happen?
I am not sure, and let me say why. I think that one of the things that happened when Dobbs was decided was that the narrative was sort of like abortion is thrown to the states. And we live in such a polarized environment where state law is so different that people are like, well, I'm in California, so I'm good. I've got Gavin Newsom, he's got hair gel, I can have an abortion if I need one, right? And Gavin is doing the Lord's work. I mean, he's really doing an amazing job protecting people's rights to health care. But if Congress becomes Republican controlled, they will pass a nationwide abortion ban. President Biden, I believe, will veto that. But in 2 years, we don't know who's going to control the White House. And so there's nothing that states can do. What Dobbs really stands for is that abortion is up to all of us. That right, that freedom, whether we enjoy it or we don't, is up to every single voter. So when people say to me, what can we do? The Supreme Court took all the power away from us. I say it's the opposite. The Supreme Court gave all the power to all of us as voters. And that's what we feel terrified about, right? Because it's on us to decide if this right is going to continue to be a right, if this freedom, if this issue of equality is going to matter. So I would just really encourage everyone to make sure that people understand it is absolutely on the ballot in November. Whether there's a referendum or whatever the candidates' position are, this is what Republicans have said they're going to do, and we should believe them.
Okay. Do we have any questions in the audience? We have one right up in the front. If you could wait for the mic. Sorry, it's coming. Great. Sorry. And if you could tell us who you are, too.
Sure, thank you. I'm Susie Cranston with First Republic Bank. And I don't know whether I'm naively optimistic or just naive, but it feels to me oftentimes like there's so much still in the middle ground that maybe 80% of Americans can really, gather around. And we spend so much of our time in the sort of 20% where we're polarized and opposite. And I'm just curious, from your perspective, do you think that there is still a common middle ground that most of us can get behind? And for those of us that might be eager to say, hey, let's focus on the things we can agree with and make some progress there, what advice do you have for us? I mean, is it a third party? I mean, what is it that it might take to get us there?
Yeah, so there absolutely is a lot of common ground among the American people. Tons on things including the right to an abortion, on gun safety, gun violence protection measures, on banning Congress from trading stocks, for example. There's tons of issues. I could go on and on. What there's not is very much common ground amongst the people who are sent to Washington. And that problem has gotten markedly worse even in the 4 years I've been in Washington, and I fear it's going to get even worse going forward. So when we talk about gerrymandering, we often think about it about people having their vote taken away, not being able to elect a candidate of choice, and that's true. But what gerrymandering really does at the sort of institutional level is produce a much more polarized institution. So when you pack Republicans, often whiter, wealthier, whatever the demographic is, into one district, and you pack other people into another, what you end up doing is electing a very, very strong progressive liberal and a very strong conservative Republican, and then the common ground disappears. And so I think we have fewer and fewer battleground states. We have fewer and fewer battleground districts. I represent a battleground district. My district's equal numbers of Democrats and Republicans, and I wouldn't trade that for anything. Now, it's not easy, especially not easy at points like this in the election cycle. But I'm a better representative because I have to listen to, learn from, and talk with people who think differently than me. But those districts are thinning. There's fewer of them. And that, I think, our politics in Washington reflects that structural problem. But I don't think it's a problem among the American people. It's there, don't get me wrong. But I think it's more extreme. What you see in Washington is more extreme than what you see on the ground amongst the American people in terms of middle ground.
Great question, thank you. Oh, we have one in the back here, if you could wait for the mic.
Hi, I'm Tracy Laney with Levi Strauss, so I live up north in the state. We heard from Representative Cheney yesterday about the work of the January 6th Commission, and I assume you were there on January 6th and were under personal attack. And what I'm worried about these days heading into the midterms is not just kind of women coming out and allies to women coming out in support of making sure we protect our bodies and our health. I'm actually worried that a lot of Americans don't understand the existential threat to democracy that we have, especially with all the election deniers on the ballot. So I'd love to get your perspective, especially since you do sit in a politically diverse district, on that particular issue.
Yep. So look, I think we have to be very clear about this. And when I do canvas trainings to go out and knock doors, which I hope you all will knock doors wherever you are, please find a race, whatever your politics are, please knock doors, because it will make you a better leader and a better American. But when I knock doors, I do canvas trainings for volunteers who are going to knock doors. And I always teach them, one of my sayings on my whiteboard is, knock loud, be proud. And because I get people who go knock and they're like, and then they run away before anyone can come to the door. Do you know what I mean? It's like a stealth ding-dong ditch. I'm like, so what I always tell them is, if your neighbor's house was on fire or there was a risk of a hurricane and you needed to evacuate, how would you knock on your neighbor's door? Loud. Because you'd want them to come. You'd want them to know, well, democracy is on fire. It is at risk of burning down. The institutions that have upheld this country and frankly helped spread democracy and human rights throughout the world are at risk. So knock loud, because we are at that kind of risk. I do think we see a strong correlation between education and kind of the way people think about the sort of institutional risks that we see versus kind of particular issues. So I'm very fortunate. I represent a very well-educated district. So I've had a lot of Republicans come up to me. They've been like, I'm not voting for a single Democrat except you. And you think, oh, like I'm so great. And then they say, I don't even like you, lady. It's just that I'm not sending anyone to Washington who will ever attack our Capitol and our democracy and our election system ever again, right? And many of them are veterans who fought and died for that. So I think there is some awareness, but I think, frankly, for younger people, they have lived through so many attacks on democracy in their lives. These are voters whose first memory maybe was hanging chads in Florida, and it has only gotten worse from there. So it's not that young people are disengaged, it's that they're disillusioned. And how we get them back into the fold and turning out is something that I spend every day working on and trying to do. Because I think some of them feel like it's already gone. Democracy's already lost. And I think we have to show them that isn't the case. And I think the January 6th Commission on that accountability work is an important part of that.
Okay, very quickly, you're up for tough election cycle for you. How high do your ambitions go beyond the House?
Oh, I mean, today they went to getting here on time. Like, I mean, my son called me. I was like half an hour late. He called me and he's like, "Mom, I forgot my ID for my PSAT. Can you drive it to school?" And I was like, oh. So that's what, being one of Fortune's powerful women looks like, is making sure you get that ID to the high school on time. So I don't know. I mean, I think I will say this. I try not to foreclose opportunity to myself, because I have found in my life, particularly as a woman, as someone who grew up in a rural area, as someone who's not a person of wealth, like some doors get closed in my face. So I'm not going to go pull any other ones closed, right? So, one of the best pieces of advice I ever got is that doors will be closed in your life, but others will open, and your job is just to see them. You don't have to walk through every door, but you have to be open to seeing them. So I think about trying to make sure I can win this election, and then I'm going to stand there and take a look at the next doors and think about what might come next. But I've loved serving. I've loved getting a chance to learn more about this country and what makes it viable and strong and healthy, and I want to keep doing that work for the rest of my career, whether it's in elected office or whether it's in some other kind of public service.
Congresswoman, thank you so much for joining us. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.